welcome. This is the Reconsider Simon podcast where we delve into the weird and wonderful aspects of our reality. This is podcast number 21, and I'm going to be, I think I'm feeling quite saucy and dangerous today. I'm going to be talking about feminine and masculine in terms of the energies, also potentially about gender as well, which is a big hot potato at the moment. So yeah, let's do it. You may or may not be aware, but the whole idea of like masculine and feminine energies and genders is really in the public arena at the moment, being debated quite hard. I think some of the various aspects that are being discussed are relatively valid in some instances, but there is an aspect, in my humble opinion, where I think some of the true aspects of feminine and masculine are maybe under attack, and there's various inversions going on. And my reason behind it, I think, maybe to control humanity, but also just to cause division as well and set people against each other. And it's a huge distraction. And I think, this is my own opinion here, but particularly within the West, I think the debate really is over a very quite small, tiny subsection of society. The media like to blow things up massively. But I think there's another aspect to this where I think this is the collective shadow that is emerging as well. Healing various archetypes, and I think it's not just happening on the macro, it's happening in the micro. Like, I'm struggling with my own feminine and masculine energies, and I've been wrangling with that recently, so that's really come up for me. But I think that's coming up on a wider point as well, externally to the whole population. So that's kind of a brief synopsis, I think, what's going on at the moment. So just a quick, very indulgent personal update, which, as I've mentioned, the reason why I'm doing this podcast are the whole kind of masculine and feminine energies within myself and unhealed aspects of myself has really come to the surface. So that's hence why we're talking about that today. But I don't really like to make this as a big pity party, but these last few months for me have been really, really horrendous. It's kind of one of the reasons why I haven't really been producing that much content. A lot of it is surrounding my health, which has been very, very painful and elaborate. And I've had very, very, I don't know why I'm laughing, but I guess it's just because of the craziness of what's been going on. I've had these very, very strange, very intense spiritual attacks, and it's just been this never ending interference. Thankfully, I'm sort of coming out of all of that now, and I'm still really decompressing actually what happened. And I know on previous podcasts, I sort of mentioned about twin flame energies coming into the mix as well in my life again for the second time. And so I've sort of had a very strange situation with that as well. So it feels like I've been hit on all sides, and the twin flame energies, again, I'm decompressing on that, what that sort of meant. And it has felt amazing at points, but it's been very much draining my energy and has been a factor in making my health worse, unfortunately. So it's just been wild, just been hit on all sides. It's been a very intense few months for me. And I think it has for a few other people as well. Like, I'm generally watching other people in the YouTube space and other videos, online videos, and health is a big thing at the moment. And thankfully, the sun is now shining outside and I'm feeling a lot better. I'm still not perfect. But the hot weather has kind of been quite welcome, and I'm just feeling a lot more balanced now in myself as well, which is really, really good. And I don't feel well enough really to sort of do this podcast, but I have really been knocked off my perch, and what's been going on has been like so wild. In my whole life, I couldn't imagine what's been going on. And at some point I'm going to sort of probably talk about it, but it's really just completely shattered me and has had me questioning literally all of my spiritual beliefs that I've accrued, I guess, since probably about 2016, 2014. That's just like probably when I vaguely got to start getting spiritual and sort of found conspiracies. But it's just literally hit me to the core. The whole foundation has been smashed, and I've gone back to square one in terms of like, okay, what do I believe? What's going on in this reality? Who am I? Just all of these like huge questions. And I've had to really question my own intuition because that was infiltrated, which is crazy. And I know I've done not loads, but I did a few videos to do with a heightened level of awareness, particularly in terms of like feeling energy. And I've, collected a lot of data and started speaking about that sort of stuff. And, being honest, it brings all of that into question. So I'm not completely writing it off, and I'm still sort of decompressing, trying to figure out what the hell has gone on. But yeah, at some point I will kind of own up to that and try and sort of figure out exactly how to navigate, what I'd released before in terms of videos and where I stand on certain things now. Overall, I've had to give myself a lot of distance over this entire situation. I'm generally starting to get a little bit more clarity every day as I progress, but I've had to give myself time to heal and just to get myself back on my own 2 feet. And again, maybe I'll talk about what's been going on because it is quite extraordinary. But yeah, I still need a bit of time to kind of really decompress and kind of figure out what the hell has been going on. And I guess there's a strange aspect to these aspects of growth. It has genuinely pushed me off my path, like from what I was on, and I'm now going a completely different direction. And it has caused utter chaos. And there is this general pattern that seems to be in my life when these spiritual awakenings occur. They have been quite painful. And again, bringing up the idea when I first started getting into this, in the background, I was having quite a painful, like unhappy time. And the first time I got into spiritualist stuff, I found meditation, but I just come out of a long-term relationship. Again, my health wasn't that great. There was just general dissatisfaction of me living in London at the time. And I didn't know what I was doing. So it just seems this pattern of like spiritual growth when, something huge happens and more revelations sort of come into view for me. It's always in a background of quite painful things like floating around me and experiencing quite painful experiences. And it's never, that spiritual growth for me is never like a love and light, amazing experience. It's always been very varying degrees of pain, unfortunately. As you can hear, I've become quite black-pilled by everything. I'm going through very much a nihilistic period, not really trusting my own intuition, unfortunately, and anything around me and any information that I've been, latched onto over these last few years. It just feels everything's really just like an illusion. I've just been experiencing these really hyper illusions around me. So it's been quite hard to know what to trust. And I'm just coming out of that period of just like, okay, what's truth? I don't know. Start again. So part of this healing period really it's really brought in the idea of like feminine and masculine energies like into view for me. And really, I hadn't really kind of considered this, but these are really like fundamental energies, not only to ourselves, but to our planet. And it kind of inhabits so many aspects of our reality, this idea of like feminine and masculine energies. And they're so, so important. And it's kind of strange that I've never really delved into it that much in terms of myself. I realize now how important it is. And again, these opposites and contrasting energies really just flow through everything more than just people. There are just various spiritual concepts, like such as earth energies we've spoken about at length on this channel, to do with masculine and feminine ley lines, water as well. There are different feminine and masculine aspects of water, celestial bodies. So obviously the planets, the sun, the moon obviously have various kind of gender expressions as well. And even just the basics like language as well, not maybe in English so much, but definitely more like Spanish and French. These are kind of fundamental like rules to the language that has a feminine and masculine kind of expression to it. So in this episode, I'm really going to be exploring not just the feminine and masculine energies within myself, but just the whole of reality. What do these energies, how they interweave through these various concepts that we interact with on a sort of daily basis. So that's going to be the remit for this podcast. And going back to my more personal experiences, which again, I'm still unpacking, and I had these really severe spiritual attacks, and I'm trying to look at it as like, okay, this is just because it's derailing me off my path from what I was doing, or is it realigning me on a different path? And is it showing me unhealed aspects? I'm just trying to see the positive in this rather than it just being completely like a black pill. Oh my God, I'm being attacked. Why? Trying to see the silver lining to sort of see if there's some kind of positive that kind of comes out of this. And within myself, I've always considered maybe that I'm more in my feminine energy. I've never really considered myself like a really masculine, blokey guy. And I think some of like the archetypes or the characteristics really, particularly in like British society of like what makes a man is like, oh, you like football. And there's all these kind of more cultural things that people attach themselves to, which are probably like unhelpful. I don't really like a lot of those kind of cultural things that kind of are supposed to make you a man. So I haven't really had any kind of like association with these types of characteristics. But what was fascinating to try and gain some clarity and get some outsider help. I had a really helpful session with someone, and she helped me realize actually I had unhealed feminine aspects within me, and it was kind of my masculine was sort of there, it was sort of dominant, sort of dormant, but it's the feminine really that has really needed to be looked at. So that was quite a profound aha moment. And I do have this tendency to work very, very hard and sometimes find it difficult to relax and maybe nurture myself and give myself like unconditional love. And I think that probably points towards maybe a dominant masculine, just a feminine that's just not working correctly. And it's these unhealed, dark feminine energies, which the healer, this is her language and her sort of lexicon called the Medusa gaze, which was quite interesting. You know, that's like Greek mythology with the woman with the snakes coming out of her head and sort of turns men to stone. And it was a helpful kind of visual because it kind of related to me and past relationships of people I've chosen before. And I'm not throwing shade to them because we're all on our path. They're all unhealed aspects of them and unhealed aspects of me. And we're just like mirroring each other. But it just goes to show, you know, how that unhealed dark feminine energy within me has kind of was basically dictating like who I was choosing in these romantic relationships. And, you know, being honest, I haven't really had an amazing history with romantic relationships, if I'm being honest. So it's that idea of like finding that true feminine aspect within me. And it's the same for everyone. Obviously, you can be a man, or you can be a woman, but you're going to have that polarity of feminine and masculine energies within you. And that's really important to recognize. And there's that idea of just like nurturing yourself, nurturing ideas, and it just affects everything. If that's off balance, it affects your friendships, which it definitely has. It affects your compassion to yourself, which it definitely has as well in terms of nurturing yourself. And a lot of my, you know, healing throughout these years in terms of like dealing with traumas, it's been really focused on like the inner child. And I've used like a range of modalities, like I'm sure you have. You're listening at the moment, you've probably done a whole load of different types of practice. And there's so much out there. It's quite an amazing time for that to really kind of, you know, self-analyze and figure yourself out and heal yourself from like patterns and ancestral stuff. But strangely, I've never really looked at my own feminine and masculine aspects. And this has really been lost in the process, really. So I guess now it's time for me to really look at these things. And again, it's really intrinsic to the whole human experience. If these things are off, then your experience is going to be off. And balancing and healing these energies, it's foundational. And again, in some weird way, I haven't really sort of tackled these before. And it's taken me all these years to kind of get to this point of deep thought and deep introspection. And I guess this is a small silver lining to some of these spiritual attacks, and just my life being completely turned upside down has kind of brought me to this point. I mean, the theory is that if your feminine and masculine is in balance and it creates harmony within yourself and your life and harmony around you and the relationships around you and the external reality. But, you know, what is this idea of the perfect divine masculine, the perfect divine feminine energies? What are these? You know, what is the template? Do we really realistically understand what it means? Will we ever? I mean, these are big questions I've been considering, really. Because you can do so much research, there's so many websites out there discussing this online, and also obviously video streaming platforms, tons of people talking about these things. And it has all these various characteristics that people talk about, but really, going forward in the future, I mean, do we really, really understand these energies? Do we really understand the core heal template for feminine, the core heal template for masculine? And we don't have a lack of information, because if you know, looking within the new age communities like online video streaming platforms again, or even just traditional religious methodologies. It could be kind of Christianity, it could be Islam, it could be like Buddhism. They all have their own traditions, they all have their own information and how they treat the masculine and feminine. So there is so much information out there to sort of get your teeth into, which is what I've been doing for this podcast, and it's been incredibly helpful. But there's this big thing. If you look at the media at the moment, it's just this cultural thing where you're creating these two forces and they're being set against each other. And I'm seeing it time and time again. It just keeps coming up. And especially if you look at the algorithm of like Facebook, it's just like constant feminine and masculine. It's been, culture at the moment is creating a battlefield for gender. And it is really, really ridiculous. And it's like there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. It's all binary. One is really bad and the other one's really, really good. It's just insane. And I guess, it is again the collective shadow, but I think there are definitely forces within the tech space and within media that are really just throwing like water into a chip pan just to kind of blow it up and just to get people at each other, and just this real suspicion with each, whether you're a woman or a man. It's just crazy at the moment. So returning back to me, because it is my podcast, and my weak side was my feminine side. And that's not to say that the feminine is weak. It was just in this particular case, my feminine side had experienced trauma, so it wasn't operating correctly. Maybe I'd lost connection with the purity of that energy in some way. And then my masculine side was either not present or it was being dominating. Again, I'm still trying to figure these things out and flesh it all out. But the next question comes from is like, where has this damage come from? Where has this trauma come from? Is this from past lives? Is this epigenetics in terms of like family being passed down through generations? Is it who you've like acquainted yourself with over your lifetime in terms of like friends and the templates and the models of like what femininity is and what masculinity is? Is it damage through, previous relationships? That can happen. So there's a big question of like, where's this like trauma occurred? And in terms of like the wounded feminine, which I'm talking about now, there's all these like archetypes that a lot of people will be aware of because they're very cultural. The idea of the evil stepmother you see in fairy tales, who dominates people and is not very nice. Or you get the seductress who uses their kind of sexy ways to kind of get what they want. So there's all these like archetypes that people know about the wounded feminine, sort of the dark feminine. A note of caution, again, when discussing these traits of the wounded feminine, I'm drawing a lot of information from the internet and from books and just from my own, intuition and experience in life. And obviously, going forward, really, we need to explore what are these healed aspects of the feminine? What are these healed aspects of the masculine? What does that mean? But, in terms of gender, if you're a man or a woman, these energies are going to be slightly different in terms of the polarity, and the severity will differ depending on your gender. And it's that idea of the wounded feminine, maybe that you're maybe resisting your femininity. You're disconnected from yourself, from the softer side. It's all go, go, go. You're just always about producing stuff and action and not nurturing yourself in any sort of way. Or maybe you just see the feminine as part of your weak side. And this is really, I think, prevalent across modern society, most definitely in the most recent history, where these ideas of nurturing and going slow are seen as weaknesses, like laziness in some way. So there's definitely a huge amount of balancing that needs to happen across, the whole of society to accept that more softer way of living. Throughout my adult life, I've generally been quite guilty of this, but just the idea of just not giving yourself space and just filling your life with things to do all the time. And just not nurturing yourself and just maybe just sitting there and doing nothing for a period of time. These last few months, I've had a lot of time to do that and reflect. So that's been very much different to the majority of my adult life. And this is the idea that you just have to appear tough to the world, to tough people around you and strong, even though inside you're just completely falling apart. Of course, when you're born into this world, your mother is the most important model of feminine energy in a way. And if she's had a bad time from her family, from your grandparents, obviously these like traumas going to be passed down to her. And so that's going to affect your relationship with your mother in so many different ways. And again, it's not her fault and it's not your ancestors' fault. It's just what's happened. So this all affects your own femininity or the energies within you. And it, affects your ability to feel safe in a relationship, to feel sensual, to feel love, and not to feel shame and guilt around your sexuality and your body. These can all affect romantic relationships because of that kind of mother template. So it's really going to affect you in so many intricate ways, subtle ways that you're not even aware of sometimes. And it's just that idea of just not seeing the beauty in yourself, being, and just loving yourself. I feel really saccharine at the moment. Just love yourself. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, then what's going to happen is that you're going to experience the wounded masculine if you then come into union with someone, into a relationship. It's going to bring up codependency in the relationship. Unfortunately, it might start to bring up ideas of abuse, maybe verbal abuse, and unfortunately, physical abuse can happen. And that can be either from a man or a woman in a relationship. I don't think it's segregated to one particular sex sometimes. And that has definitely been a part of my romance story. I mean, not to the extremes, but there's definitely been elements within that. And I'm sure I've done that to other people as well. That's a brief run through some of the traits of the wounded feminine that I've come across, that I think, from researching and I've come across in my own personal experience. And again, really, what is the healed template? What is that? That's the big question. But going to now really focus on the idea of archetypes. And it's funny, when you contrast the amount of dark feminine archetypes compared to masculine, there are so many more. And it's fascinating, like, why would that be? Is that because there's an overall fear or rejection of the feminine? That's part of it. That culturally we just created so many ideas of what constitutes a dark feminine character. Or is it, to be fair to the feminine, is it just because the feminine energy is just like more kaleidoscopic? Is it just really, really complex compared to the masculine? Maybe the masculine energy is a bit more simple and the feminine is just so much more complex. And that is why you have this huge kaleidoscope of different archetypes. I thought maybe because the feminine is that much more spiritual, there's just more depth to it. There's just more complexity. And again, this is my own reading on the situation, so I'm projecting here. And again, through the course of researching this, I've sort of really readjusted some of my opinion, I guess, on masculine and feminine energies. But is it because the masculine is more of a movement, it's more of a forward motion, more of a protectorate, it's just a simpler thing? I don't know. It's, discuss. But here's a following list of some of the archetypes that I found. A lot of them you'll find in cultural films, movies, stories. There's always an aspect to these archetypes. And also, I should point this out, these archetypes, these unhealed feminine archetypes, even though I'm saying unhealed feminine, I don't think in a lot of cases doesn't mean it's bad or unhealed, because I think sometimes you can call upon these energies to help you in life. These archetypes can be useful. And they're just illustrative of different aspects of the self. It's a visual 3D way of describing these energies. And the energy is very, very complex. And as humans, you need patterns, we need like drawings, we need imagery to sort of describe what it is. And these archetypes are really, really helpful for that. So the first archetype is the idea of the witch, the mystical, powerful woman who's feared for her knowledge and her magic. And I think within a cultural and religious context, particularly in the United Kingdom for hundreds of years ago, when, religion and Christianity was so prevalent throughout society, but in a very, very fearful way, fire and brimstone way, that when you had women maybe were living on their own, who were very adept at herbs and healing people and had maybe particular sacred knowledge, they're very much tarred as being these like very evil people, and they were burnt at stake on the stake and treated incredibly poorly. And I guess that archetype still kind of exists to that day. And I think there is the idea maybe there are people who are witches that are maybe working on the darker side of life, but they're also white witches as well, doing incredibly good, nice things. So that is definitely the duality of these archetypes is very, very interesting. Moving on, then we have the seductress, using her allure and sexuality, challenging norms of sex. So yeah, again, this is culturally it's throughout films and stories and things, and not necessarily always a bad thing. You know, sometimes the seductress can be a positive character. Then there's the femme fatale, who's very attractive and ensnaring and manipulative and leaves men in ruin. So yeah, I would say that's more of a negative archetype in some particular way. Then there's the devouring or the dark mother, who is destructive, intensely nurturing, but maybe too intense when they actually end up smothering and consuming their loved ones. So yeah, I would then say really that this kind of archetype maybe a bit more on the negative side. There's less of duality with the positive there. Then moving on, there's the destroyer, which I'd never heard of before, who brings chaos and death, but also transformation. So maybe I've had a bit of that recently. So maybe Lady Destroyer has moved into my life and caused chaos and caused death, not in a literal sense, but just death of a previous self, a previous path in some way, and create a transformation. So again, there's a duality in that particular archetype. Then there's more of a balanced archetype, the crone, who's a wise, old, educated being, again, bringing transformation. So without a doubt, way more positive archetype of the feminine, without a doubt. And the next one, the dark priestess. Ooh. Keeper of occult knowledge, channeling, supernatural, challenging authority in the patriarchy. So yeah, I guess in a way this is a more of a positive archetype. Maybe there's a bit of darkness in there some way, but she wields it in a positive way. So yeah, again, a bit of duality on that one. The next is the dark maiden, who's innocent in appearance, but wields deep on hidden power and subverting her passivity. So yeah, that's a really interesting one. So it's from external perspective, a lot of people would mistake her for being passive and just very, very mute. But actually underneath she's incredibly strong and wields this incredible hidden strength, which she can basically unleash at any point and just surprise everyone. So yeah, I would say that's a very, very positive archetype. And yes, maiden would be pointing towards a younger individual, younger woman, I would assume. The mad woman, inhabiting chaos, rebellion, untamed freedom, and driven mad by normality. So yeah, I would say again, this is very much a positive archetype. So if you're wanting to break out of normality, break out of just constant drudgery, the mad woman, inhabit that energy, be very, very helpful. But I guess if you inhabit it for too long, it could be very, very destructive. So I assume that again, a slight duality to that one as well. And then finally, the warrior, which I would say is a very, very positive one. It's fierce, independent, and unafraid. So you have, without a doubt, wielding those energies would be very, very helpful. But obviously in a very particular context. So there you go. That's the wounded feminine. Some of the traits maybe that you may encounter with the wounded feminine, and then aspects of archetypes with the feminine. Obviously not always bad, not always wounded. Some of these energies can be really, really helpful to wield in particular situations. So, and that can be for men or women. So it's not necessarily segregated to a particular gender. So we continue on to the wounded masculine and the masculine archetypes. And in terms of definition of the wounded masculine and the traits, like I said earlier, it does feel sometimes that the masculine energy is maybe a bit simpler compared to the feminine. But this is, maybe I'm putting a bias in there because I'm sort of drawing quite heavily from sort of New Age spirituality, and then also Western spirituality as well. And as I will detail later, when you get to some of the religious concepts, actually some of the feminine and masculine energies appear slightly different in some of these traditions. But many of the unhealed aspects of the masculine, immediately most people recognize this, is the idea of aggression, just overreacting and having a really, really quick temper and then needing to dominate. And I think at the moment that masculine ended, that sort of I hate this word, but toxic masculine. This is quite prevalent in the cultural space at the moment, in the mainstream. It's been spoken at length at the moment. And, there's obviously kind of other aspects to the unhealed masculine where it's just you're emotionally unavailable. You're sort of struggling to express your emotions and you're just generally just shutting down emotionally as well. Other traits is the idea of just being hyper competitive and just that real constant need to win all the time, even at expense of your own personal relationships around you. So that's one aspect. And then another would be the fear of vulnerability, just avoiding being vulnerable in front of people and just actually viewing the idea of being vulnerable as an actual weakness and a lack, in connections. Can also bring about ideas of control issues in people, just wanting to control outcomes, wanting to control people, situations, and just that real fear of uncertainty. And, some of these traits now affect everyone, men and women without a doubt. And can also bring about, this is a universal thing as well, the difficulty in trusting others and just having that protection mechanism, of perceived threats. Just not being trusting of people. This is where it gets slightly interesting, where like the idea of neglecting self-care. Yeah, you can maybe put that in the wounded feminine, but it could also be in the wounded masculine. The idea of like you're prioritizing other people's needs around you, your family, your partner, or even society as a whole, which can lead to burnout. So that idea of go, I've got to fix this person, or I've got to fix this problem in society. Like masculine go energy. So that's kind of unhealed, but at the same time, you're not nurturing yourself, which is also a feminine aspect. So sometimes some of these concepts and ideas can sort of span the two energies in a weird sort of way. And again, obviously, if you're prioritizing other people or other societal needs outside of yourself, that can lead to eventual resentment because you feel it's not being reciprocated back at you. Now moving through to the masculine archetypes. Again, just want to reiterate, it just feels a lot simpler, these archetypes, in comparison when you contrast it with the feminine. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So the first one would be the tyrant king. This is the tyrannical individual who abuses his power and craves power and tends to dominate over people that he's supposed to be taking care of. On the opposite side of that, you have the weakling king, who's an individual who abdicates responsibility and hides from the challenges that he's supposed to be sorting out. And the next one would be the sadist warrior. And actually, as opposed to being a positive warrior archetype, it's more the individual delights in cruelty and dishing out pain. So very, very different. And another warrior archetype would be the masochist warrior, who turns the aggression inward. So likes causing himself pain, which is a bit fruity. And then another one was a bit more well known. Would be the magician. This is a detached manipulator who exploits individuals through his knowledge. Again, I would say the magician can also be a positive archetype as well in certain circumstances. Then you have the lover. These are going to be more sort of duality-based ones, I think, going forward. The lover is addicted and consumed by desire and has no boundaries or self-control. And again, I think the lover can be a positive archetype in certain situations. But obviously these ones here I'm describing are a bit more toxic. And then another one would be the wild man, similar to the wild woman, I guess. And this is an untamed primal force. It's aggressive and chaotic. And so, again, could be quite toxic or negative in certain situations, but if you're looking for transformation, then the wild man would be a good energy to sort of try and channel. And then you have the green man, which sides more with the natural, the wild side of life, but also can be destructive. Nature is a beautiful creation, but at the same time, it can be very destructive at the same time. So it holds that dualism again. And another one I never really heard of before is called the pan. And this is more of an animalistic energy, full of sexual desire, again, causing chaos and disruption, wherever he goes. Again, I think that would maybe be a duality thing, because again, in certain contexts, that animalistic sort of pan energy could be quite useful. So that's a quick run through some of the masculine archetypes. And yeah, again, I just reiterate, I just feel that a feminine just has more complexity. There's just more nuance to those energies. And yeah, it's obviously all this information I've just grabbed off the internet for the purposes of this podcast. And you may have different opinions about how some of these energies operates and how you would describe it. I guess it can be a very, very subjective thing. But these are very, helpful visual aids to, again, just describe energy. That's how they operate. But there's a whole global trend really of just repeating the idea of like the rise of the feminine and down with the patriarchy. But you could maybe look at it as maybe the masculine side is misunderstood and not really fully formed yet or being explored correctly, rather than it being sort of categorized as being dangerous and toxic, which is part of the global conversation at the moment, particularly within the media. I think maybe we need to reframe it and actually kind of explore the masculine energies a bit more. These dual energies, these archetypes are playing out 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. In the arena of human drama and emotions and actions, we're all acutely aware of these energies constantly. You can't get away from them. The beauty of it, the joy of it, the pain, the chaos. Again, it's 24/7. When you're awake, and then when you're sleeping, you can't get away from it because then you're dreaming about it. So it's just like this constant theatre that's always there, playing out in so many different ways, and we're constantly reminded by it. So I've just explored the surface level ideas of some of these energies of masculine and feminine within the human lexicon, the human emotions, the human body, the human vessel. But in reality, these energies of feminine and masculine are everywhere in our reality, and particularly prevalent through religion and obviously various different spiritual modalities and even beyond that. So that's what I'm going to really explore now. And particularly looking into the spiritual and religious, some of the kind of religious traditions I'm not that clued up on. It's been incredibly helpful actually to sort of see how they view these energies. But again, it's not just the human vessel that dances with these energies. The division of male and female surrounds and feels like it fills so many aspects of reality, and it's just fundamental in so many ways. Even on a molecular level, you can sort of poetically read the atom with a central womb, like a nucleus that could be like a feminine type of archetype, and then the masculine electrons whizzing around with all their action. So yeah, maybe it just could go that deep. You could sort of poetically sort of decode on a molecular level how some of these energies are operating. Even in the macro actions of your life, what you spend your time doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it be Monday to Friday, how are you harnessing these energies? The feminine side of life, maybe you're nurturing people via education or healing. These are all feminine aspects. Or maybe your job or, how you spend your time, majority of your life, you could be really harnessing masculine action energy through things like engineering and construction and manufacturing and the protectorate of policing as well. These are all very masculine actions and led activities. I think you probably look at all aspects of reality and life and really look for these energies, and they'll be there in some form or another. But I wrote a brief list. You have electricity and magnetism, being perceived as like a masculine and a feminine expression. And then again, like I've spoken about before, earth energies, ley lines, same, they have masculine and feminine aspects. Water, Taoism, with the whole yin and yang. You have Hinduism with Shiva and Shakti energies. In alchemy, I don't really know a huge amount about alchemy, but there's a thing called soul and lunar. In the Kabbalah, the tree of life, you have severity and mercy. That's actually quite an interesting one because there's like a third strand to that as well. And the same with Gnosticism as well. There's Sophia and Logos. And then you can go right back to ancient Egypt or Egyptian mysticism. You have Isis and Osiris as well. And then maybe more of a kind of Wicca, Western methodology. You have goddesses and God. Christianity, you have Mary and Christ. And if you're a bit more esoteric with Christianity, maybe you perceive you have Mary Magdalene and Yeshua. And Sufism, it's the more mystical side of Islam. You have Jamal and Jalal. So you can see a lot of these spiritual and religious traditions have their own versions of these masculine and feminine archetypes and these energies and the way they describe it. But anyway, now we're going to be talking about electricity and magnetism. I think this is quite interesting because you have electricity, which very much dominates, our technological society. Electricity is everywhere. And it mirrors really the current paradigm, the idea of having quite a patriarchy, a society that's full of a lot of masculine energy. And electricity is supposed to be like a masculine energy. It's like a powerful force. It can kill you. It's that strong. If you accidentally touch high voltage lines, you're done for, But then there's like magnetism, which is supposed to be the sort of opposite of electricity. And it can be considered to be more divine. And you have these very esoteric ideas. Well, I don't think they're esoteric, it's reality, but I think there are a lot of these feminine principles within magnetism that are really being suppressed from society. The idea of anti-gravity and magnetism being sort of fundamental to that energy. Free energy as a whole. Electricity, very forceful energy and requires a lot of kinetic energy to create it. Magnetism there, the base force, could be the key to free energy. Again, a lot more of a harmonious type of energy. So this future feminine magnetism energy is an energy for the future. It's more nurturing. It's less destructive. It's just very poetic with that idea of the rise of the feminine. You have maybe the rise of magnetism and free energy and anti-gravity. And you're kind of coming out from that very dominant masculine electrical-based technologies. I just think it's a very nice poetic correlation, really, between the two concepts, really. Now we have the earth energy, spoken a lot about on this channel. Ley lines, everyone knows ley lines, don't they? Of course they do. And then within those ley lines, you're supposed to have masculine and feminine principles. I know it's not widely accepted across all dowsing, because I was talking to one dowser and he thought I was crazy for saying there was masculine and feminine energies. But that's a kind of tradition that I learned in. But yeah, here in the UK, very famous example everyone knows is the Michael and Mary line, which stretches from the southwest tip of Cornwall and stretches around about 360 miles all the way to Norfolk on the Norfolk coast and the North Sea area. And then apparently esoteric writer John Michel in the 1960s very much popularized this line. And then you have pioneering dowsers, Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst wrote a very famous book and really, again, popularized those lines even more and explored some of the energies. And they found that actually the Michael line was more in line with solar alignments and the Mary was more in line with lunar alignment. So again, if you're looking at celestial bodies, the sun being appeared as masculine and the moon as feminine, then that tallies very well. So that's hence why they called these energies Michael and Mary. And again, through some of my own research, particularly when you look at Maria Wheatley, it's what's fascinating about some of these masculine and feminine energies. They're actually going through particular sacred sites that are maybe have more of a masculine expression or a feminine expression. So if you go to the AP complex, you have Silbury Hill, you see that big hill. And then you have West Kennet Longbow, which you can kind of enter into. And it's very much like a womb-like feminine type of experience. But then you might get the masculine Michael energy. It goes through very phallic-looking megaliths. So Glastonbury Tor, for instance, has the big tower on the top. So it's a very sort of protruding masculine energy. So I just think it's fascinating how, the energy that goes through the landscape sort of defines what type of megalith is there. So there's a correlation there between the feminine energy of the ley line and the masculine energy of the ley line, but it also links to churches as well. So the Mary lines are relating to churches called Mary, and then some of the masculine and Michael relates to churches called Michael. So again, it begs the question, because a lot of these churches or cathedrals around the United Kingdom and then just around Europe especially, they took over a lot of the sacred sites that were there pre-Celtic times as well. So it just begs the question, what type of megalith was there before they built the church or the cathedral? Did it have a particular masculine expression? Did it have a particular feminine expression? Did that then dictate what they called the church or the cathedral? So that's the old ley lines. And then you have water, which is very much intrinsic to a lot of these megaliths as well, and particularly the AB complex. In my video I released, I realized actually water is very, very important to some of these spiritual places and works, in tandem with some of these earth energies without a doubt. And then you have this idea, again, a lot of these ideas are from Maria Wheatley, who I've learnt dowsing from, and you have yang water, which is very male type of water, which is water that's fallen from the sky. And in terms of the energies, it's not that great. So when you have like streams full of rainwater, some of the energies that kind of emitted from that aren't great on the human vessel. But then you get like yin feminine water, which is created deep within the womb of the earth. The earth, Mother Earth, being perceived as being a feminine sort of archetype of feminine energy. You could sort of see the earth as being a womb, and this water, this very spiritual water, being created from the bowels, from the womb of the earth. And the energy that comes from yin water is incredibly healing. And this is why you get like sacred springs all around the world, and spring water is revered for its healing properties. And people talk about miracles utilizing some of these waters. So now I'm going to look into more religious and spiritual, traditions and concepts. And you have the Hindu tradition, which you have Shiva, which apparently is a masculine principle, and Shakti, which is a feminine type of energy. And the energies are harnessed throughout, meditations and yoga. I know I've done a lot of yoga in my life and also done a lot of meditation. And, these energies are fundamental to some of these practices. And when these, energies are in balance, it brings spiritual harmony and awakening without a doubt. What's fascinating when you go into some of these very ancient spiritual practices or religious traditions, that their definitions and explanation for some of these feminine and masculine energies are very different to my very novice understanding. So it's been really good research and a thought experiment to really delve deep into how these different traditions treat these energies, and then just really look at, I guess, like the Western opinion of like masculine and feminine, particularly from a New Age perspective, and just go, hang on, do we have this wrong? Do we have to really reform our opinions about how these energies operate? Without a doubt, within the Hindu tradition, it kind of treats it slightly differently, with the male Shiva energy being pure consciousness, and it's stillness, formless. It's awareness, but it underpins all existence. So yeah, in many ways it feels like more of a new age, like feminine energy, but this is male Shiva energy. This is what it's described as. But then it's the Shakti female. It's the one with movement, with power, with force, that activates and creates and sustains the universe. So yeah, it's just a very fascinating look at how they basically decode these energies. And like all of these traditions, they all say, one without the other just doesn't work. So both of them need to be present. They need to be balanced to, gain that spiritual wisdom, gain that spiritual harmony. Without these energies, nothing can be created. So they both always need to be in balance, in harmony. Now we have Taoism. It's interesting how sort of Taoism, it's got a silent T in it. You never say that. But anyway, moving on. And you'll be obviously aware, you have the yin yang symbol. So Chinese philosophy, where you have yin energy, which is female. Again, sort of very different perception on this energy. It's receptive, it's dark, it's passive, and it's cold, and can be represented by the moon and night. Whereas you have the yang masculine energy, which is light, is active, it's assertive, it's warmth, it's the sun, it's day. Again, to be in balance, you have the yin yang symbol. But yeah, again, it's just Taoism was a really good example of just showing how these energies need to be present and in harmony. It's like the West illustrates these energies really as being enemies and, fighting for space, fighting for dominance in some way, which is kind of crazy. Now we have alchemy, which I don't really know a huge amount of. I know the basic gist of it. I'm not very well versed in the whole subject, but you have soul, which is masculine, and this is related to fire and substances like gold and sulfur, and its heat and its dryness and its light and its spirit. It's the ego, it's consciousness, and the visual representation they give is the Red King. Then the feminine side of that is called lunar, which is passive. It's feminine, it's water. In terms of the substances, it's silver, can be represented by salt, coldness, moisture, darkness, and symbolizes the unconscious. But it's also very, very receptive. And the visualization that is given is the White Queen. Alchemy is fascinating because it's one of those traditions actually where there's a third aspect that when you bring these two energies into union, it's called a chemical wedding. You're sort of balancing these opposites, and the union, it creates an alchemical child called a Mercurius. I hope I'm saying that right, which is an androgynous alchemical child. It's a synthesis of these two dualities. Now that's quite interesting. At the moment you have a really, well, not a big movement, but there's a certain subsection of society that claim they have no gender. And I know no shade on men at all. I mean, you do what you want to do as an adult, it's cool. But it's obviously there's a whole aspect to potentially within like elites and secret societies and certain aspects of these occult rituals when, I don't know, they're quite into that idea of just having an androgynous individual. I guess this kind of plays into the whole transhumanism debate as well, that you're not neither male or female, you're transcending the human form, you're leaving God's paradise, I guess, in a way, and you're creating something different. You're becoming your own God and an androgynous sort of individual. So yeah, it's fascinating how that kind of alchemical tradition sort of reflects those ideas. So that's alchemy. Now you have Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism. Again, it's a tradition I don't know a huge amount of. There's a slight fear, I guess, on my part. Maybe that's misplaced because I don't understand it. But yeah, I mean, it's used quite a lot just within general, like Wicca and witchy areas, and even particular subsections of the New Age as well. They sort of revere the idea, the Kabbalistic tree of life. And it diagrammatically describes existence, really. If you saw it, you'd be familiar with it. It's just like 3 pillars and these various bubbles everywhere. So it looks like a very sort of stripped down symbolic tree. And you have these 3 pillars, which is, again, slightly different to the majority of the interpretations of some of these traditions, where you have a masculine and a feminine, but you have like a third wheel in a way. So yeah, the pillar of mercy, which is on the right-hand side, is masculine, and this represents active, creative force, expansion, loving, and giving. And then the polar opposite of that, on the left-hand side, is the feminine, which is the pillar of severity, which is passive, it's receptive, it's restriction, it's discipline, it's judgment. But then similar to alchemy, there's a third aspect where you have a middle pillar which brings balance of mercy and severity and harmonizes both sides. And this represents integration and equilibrium. So yeah, just to briefly recap, Hinduism is Shakti and Shiva, but there's no word, I don't think there's any word for, the combining of these forces. And the same for Taoism, you get yin and yang, but there's no word for the sort of union of this. But Kabbalah have that, and then alchemy has that with their Mercurius, their weird androgynous alchemical child. Anyway, so yeah, just interesting how you contrast in these different traditions. Gnosticism. In Gnosticism, when the feminine and masculine, they're essentially complementary forces. When they're both in balance, it creates divine order. For the feminine side of Gnosticism, it's Sophia, which is it's divine, it's wisdom, it's creativity. Sophia creates the material world, and Sophia is actually representative of the soul's journey. It's like falling of the soul, and then redemption, descent, and then actually then going through that journey, that alchemical journey where you're turning from lead into gold, and you're going back to the divine in a way. So the Gnostic Sophia energy is very different to some of the energies you've spoken about before in terms of the feminine aspect, in terms of what it does. And it's that connecting feminine aspect for spiritual awakening. So it's got a very, very specific role, and basically creates a bridge, or it acts as a mediator to the masculine energy, which is seen as transcending. That's part of the divine. I'm not to say that Sophia isn't, but it's like the action, it's the journey which allows you to connect yourself to the masculine divine energy. So yeah, it's just a very, very different interpretation to many other spiritual dualities. So you have masculine, or as it's described as logos. It's a very loose term, but this represents transcendence. This is the unreachable, hidden aspects of the divine. It's termed as the supreme Godhead or Christ. These are the qualities it inhabits, and also includes actions like speech and initiation. So the masculine energy within Gnosticism is very, I guess it very kind of fits within mainstream Christianity, because God's always perceived as being a very masculine figure. So this is the energy, the divine, and Sophia acts to help the individual, the human, to bridge that gap and to go through that journey through redemption, pulling yourself from the bottom when you've just lost yourself in materialism, and you're then having to work your way back to spirituality, work your way back to the divine nature of the Godhead. So that's my very, very brief look through some of these spiritual traditions and religious traditions. Again, fascinating. I just always thought this exploration, some of these energies would be more standardized, and there would be, a lot of these traditions would be talking about the same thing, but actually there's quite a lot of difference there. So yeah, I think we can probably draw upon some of these ideas, going forward, and what do you want to call masculine energy? What do you want to call feminine energy? How do these energies operate? And you can probably, from all these different traditions, sort of create something new from it potentially. But my opinion is very much heavily influenced, I would say, by the New Age and just general culture, Western Christianity. I've been brought up, I was Church of England, which is the sort of the national church of the United Kingdom. Obviously, King Charles is the head of that church, apparently, although I don't think he's very Christian in any way, shape or form. But yeah, it's throughout my schooling, from infant school, as we call it, to junior school, to high school, secondary school. It was very much religious. There was prayers morning and sort of the evening, and then there was hymns as well at what we would call assembly. So it was always there, and I always found it incredibly boring. And I remember my mother at the time, when I was younger, she went through a very religious phase. She's kind of back into that religious phase now, and I had to go to Sunday school, which I really, really hated. I remember I used to cry my eyes out. So yeah, me and Christianity have always never gotten that well, but I just think it's the way that it's always been presented, particularly when you're at school, because some of these hymns are just so boring. You're like, the ink is black, the page is white. It's just, the songs just aren't catchy in any way, shape or form. They're just not fun to sing. I remember when I was even in Brighton, they have this thing called the Brighton Festival. And I got one of my friends actually joined it was like what do they call it? Gospel choir, quite famous in Brighton. And anyone can join, don't even really know how to sing, but they'll teach you how to sing sort of gospel songs and stuff. And you don't have to be particularly religious, but I remember someone I knew at the time, friend at the time, she was doing this Brighton Gospel Choir, and it was part of the festival, and I went along, and oh my God, it was so much fun. The singing was just amazing. They were just genuine talent. And I kind of got it then. I was like, God, if you had that, because I just came out elated, because at the end of the, event, everyone's dancing up, singing along, blah, blah, blah. And there's just so much joy and so much energy. And even back then, obviously quite spiritual now, and I'm sort of quite receptive to a lot of the Christian ideas, some of the Christian ideas. But back then I was just like, I wasn't atheist, but I was agnostic, and I didn't really delve into religion or spirituality at all. But even I, at that point, was like, wow, I can kind of get the idea of church, especially the kind of the black gospel churches, because that was so much fun. You just came out with so much energy and just on a real high. And then sort of contrast that to sort of Church of England, which is very, not conservative, but it's just not very exciting. Maybe I'm sort of giving it a bad name because I actually, I haven't been to a proper church ceremony for a very long time. So maybe I should go along and actually see what I think as an adult. But yeah, my whole Christian upbringing's very much been influenced by school, and I always find it very boring. But it's fascinating now. I'm reading a lot of books to do with Jesus, which is a new phase of my research, is trying to figure out who this character was. Because like I mentioned before, my spiritual beliefs have been completely shattered. I don't think I'm becoming Christian, but I'm definitely exploring some of those ideas and just trying to figure out, because like the Bible was written so long ago and it's been through so many edits. So I'm just interested to sort of try and get to the key information and, did some of these individuals actually exist? Are there historical records? Is there information out there to kind of, garner? So yeah, why am I talking about this? There was a reason. I don't know. Anyway. Yes, feminine and masculine. I was just saying, how much the way I view these energies has very much been informed by that. The idea of Jesus, the idea of Mary is very much ingrained in my head, I guess, through those years and years of schooling and of going to church, etc. And without a doubt, I wouldn't call myself new age, but a lot of the ideas you sort of come across the internet, sort of YouTube and various websites and conferences I've been to, I think people who are like into kind of new age ideas a lot of the time would never say they're into new age ideas, but yeah, I do. Obviously, I'm consuming a lot of new age content, so it informs my opinion. That's what I'm saying about how I view these energies, and it's just, I think it's a very good exploration to sort of look at some of these other spiritual traditions. I think it was fascinating. I thought I was done. There's more. I'm carrying on. There's more. I've written more notes. I didn't realize there's Egyptian mysticism. I didn't talk about this. There's Isis and there's Osiris, and these are both gods in their own right. So this is fascinating. So they're not like, in Taoism, they're just abstract energies, but with the Egyptian mysticism, these are individuals that inhabit these energies, these archetypes, these energy principles. And apparently these gods, Isis and Osiris, for the male, so Osiris, which is the god of fertility, regeneration, also represents the afterlife. He's the king, he's the judge of the dead, and also it has powers to resurrect people as well. It has a very active role. It's a creative force, but also brings order and structure as well. So there's that kind of protectorate aspect to Osiris. And then over to Isis, which is the feminine principle. And this is the goddess of magic. And this is healing and motherhood and protection. She's a powerful sorceress, apparently very receptive energy, very nurturing, intuitive, full of wisdom, and very restorative as well, and heals and protects and helps in creating life. Excuse me. A big part of their story, Osiris died, and Isis, through her mourning, is able to restore and heal him back to life. And it's through their union. It's a very powerful love story. So again, there's a kind of the whole poetry between how these energies play out and gain union, how they interplay between each other. Their partnership creates necessity for both energies. It creates cosmic balance. And apparently the cosmic order that is created is called MAT, M-A-T-T. M-A-A-T. And their partnership is a necessity for these both energies to be in balance. So it brings about spiritual renewal, and it's the whole cycle of life and death through the Isis and Osiris energies. Moving on, sort of closer to where we are now, we have Wicca, which is similar to Egyptian mysticism, where you have actually a belief in two deities. I think Wicca is one of those sort of traditions that's very open-ended with sort of belief systems, and I think depending on who you're talking to, they'll probably have a slightly different take. But this is what I found anyway. So You may agree, you may not agree if you're into Wicca. But yeah, two deities in Wicca is the god and goddess, and they both have equal power. But the feminine principle is, again, like a lot of the things we've been exploring, the feminine energy feels way more complex and manifests in three energies in the feminine, which is the triple goddess. You have the maiden, which is representative of youth and creation. Then you have the mother archetype, which is fertility and nurturing. And then you have the crone. So this is the older woman, and she had lots of wisdom, and she obviously represents sort of endings. So, within that goddess feminine energy, you have these three kind of very, very important archetypes at the same time. So within the triple goddess female energy, it represents the moon. Big moon, celestial body in the sky, which you can see. We can see it at the moment, actually. It's weird when it's kind of broad daylight and then you see sort of the moon there. These last few days, it's been like that. I think it's like a full moon in Cancer, which is my sign at the moment. So hopefully that's why I think my life's turning around for the positive, because of the astrological events that are going along at the moment. But the moon is very feminine, and it affects women very deeply, particularly obviously within menstruation. I know mainstream science never wants to admit that. They want to completely sever some of the bodily functions that happen, particularly of women. They want to sever that connection to the moon. But yeah, obviously the moon is perceived as being feminine. And then the earth, you have Mother Nature. So yeah, feminine principle again. The sea. The sea is also seen as feminine within Wicca. But yeah, that's quite interesting. You have the triple goddess of the maiden, and then the mother and the crone. But yeah, within these representative, like the physical objects, you have the moon, the earth, and the sea. There's another kind of triple aspect to that energy. I don't know if that's the way I wrote it down or what, but yeah, there you go. But I think, yeah, again, within this system, there are many shades in this system. Again, I think it's a really broad church. And I think depending on the practitioner of this, Wicca, I think it's probably going to be treated slightly differently depending on who you talk to. But the masculine is represented as the god or the horned god, and associated with forests and animals and hunting and nature in general. And in terms of like celestial bodies, you have the sun, seen as being a very masculine celestial body, and then cycles, and again nature. These are all masculine concepts basically. But within Wicca, like all of them, balance is seen as fundamental. You can't have feminine without the masculine. They both have to be there. Wicca's an interesting one, because I think, like I said, it's probably a lot of freedom of expression the way you practice it. So yeah, there's a lot of flexibility, because some of these other traditions, obviously it's very set. Not all of them, I guess there's always going to be slight variation, but they have very, very defined kind of methodologies about how they approach things. But it seems like Wicca's a bit more flexible the way they operate. Now, if I can pronounce it, Sufism. That's right, isn't it? Nailed it. Yeah, this is perceived as being the softer, more magical, mystical version of Islam. I know Islam at the moment, certain sections, political sections, there's a lot of negativity sort of drawn towards Islam, but I think it's like Christianity. It's like all these religions. I think there's kind of different shades of it, and there are moderates, and there are very softer people, and there are crazy people. And unfortunately, sometimes the craziest side of people, they tend to get more airtime, particularly in the news. But I know in certain sections of the media and certain sections of society, Islam has been quite sort of not great on the feminine as a whole. Particularly if you're going to countries like Afghanistan, where it's really just quite horrific for women. And then weirdly, I think, because a lot of these things, I think it's called the particular very extreme form of Islam, and this all gets a bit conspiratorial, but the idea that some of these three-letter agencies like MI6 and the CIA purposely wanted to spread the more extreme versions of Islam from Saudi Arabia. I can't remember what it's called now. It's got a particular name. And it's sort of really it was done on purpose, essentially, to sort of create an enemy, to create like a force that just creates chaos, because that's what they like to do. They like to create chaos. Where there are a lot softer versions of Islam out there where women are treated a lot better. Anyway, back to Sufism. But yeah, within their tradition, they have Jamal and Jalal. I hope I'm saying it correctly. But again, like all of them, they create balance. You need both the energies present to create balance. And in fact, if you don't have that balance, then you don't have the connection to God, apparently. So yeah, this is, again, fundamental. It's not explicit, but Jamal is loosely seen as a feminine energy and represents things like beauty and gentleness and grace and compassion. It is definitely seen as the more loving side of God, the more softer side of their deity, and embodies strong energies of kindness and forgiveness. So it's kind of looking at the entity of God and sort of seeing the softer side, the feminine side of it, basically. Then there's Jalal, which is more of the masculine expression, which represents majesty, awe, power, might, and rigor. And it actually has fearsome aspects of God as well. It represents divine justice and strength and transformation and shattering ego and humility. I got a sense that maybe there's slightly more of a wrathful aspect to that energy, the masculine, compared to the other traditions, but I could be wrong. I mean, maybe it's just the source where I got this information from, but yeah, it's just something of note, really. So that's Sufism. Right, now moving on. I think this is gave me a bigger aspect to this journey through the religious traditions in terms of Christendom and Christianity. Like I mentioned, I'm doing a lot of biblical reading, not specifically like the Bible, but some of the characters, particularly like Jesus at the moment, and then how this all interlinks. It's really fascinating, really out there information I'm going to be talking about at some point, particularly in relation to King Arthur as well, about how some of these stories like interlink. But yeah, I've just been really trying to understand these characters. I think it's off the back of these spiritual attacks, because it's like a lot of the clearing techniques that I was using before are all kind of tied up with certain things, and I just found they were compromised, or I thought they were compromised. I don't know if it is true or not, because I'm still in this like, I don't know what's going on sort of phase. But I started to, I mean, my mum was praying on me at some point because the attacks are so bad, because I was like, I don't know what else to do. And it's something I'd never really explored before, like really having people using religious prayer over me. It's not like I'm against it. It's just never been part of my, toolbox of spiritual protection modes. But I didn't really have any other choice. I didn't know how to end what was going on. So yeah, I think this is why it's kicked off this slight sort of biblical period of research and understanding. But yeah, Jesus is a big character, looms large, particularly within the West. Even if you're atheist, it really shapes our morality, which I always might find quite interesting. It's a lot of the religious traditions in the United Kingdom and other Western countries. Our morality is very much based on Christianity, without a doubt. But I did start to prefer using the word Yeshua as opposed to Jesus, so that's something I started doing. But Jesus is a really interesting one because such a strong archetype. I mean, even in the New Age, people don't really go to church, or they don't, read the Bible. But Jesus looms very large, a very strong force to help with clearing, negative entities, and people use his name all the time. And he's an interesting character because he's like a divine masculine and feminine all in one, which is very different to all the other ones, and actually sort of points towards being more of an androgynous character. This is like sort of mainstream Christianity, has masculine traits where, there's that famous story where there's the kind of the market traders in the temple, and he's very angrily cast them out, for doing, Babylonian sort of money magic and all the rest of it. But so he has that very masculine sort of, takes no shit sort of side. But it's also, majority of the stories of Jesus, it's very nurturing. It's very sacrificing energy. He's a spiritual mother. He gets sacrificed on the cross for people's sins. So yeah, it's a very nurturing energy for the rest of humanity. So he's a very interesting character, the mainstream aspect of Jesus anyway, because it has both of the masculine and the feminine in a way. I think it's because like he is perceived, within Christians as being like a real person. A lot of things like Taoism is not represented by any particular individual, but even like in Hinduism, Shakti and Shiva, they're gods, they're not like real people. So maybe that's why he's perceived as being a real human. So obviously the real human is going to have those two energies, he's going to have masculine, he's going to have feminine. So that's the way he's represented. But yeah, this crazy book that I'm reading at the moment, these are some quite controversial ideas. And I think his name's Ralph Ellis, I think his name is. But yeah, he sort of writes in this book. I haven't got to this part in the book, but I was listening to some of the interviews where he's talking about this particular book that I'm reading. And so I've only heard him speak about this in some of the videos when he's been interviewed. But yeah, Jesus, being part of the priest class and actually not coming from that, Bethlehem and that kind of area of Israel, not really coming from there. And he was placing it more in places like Syria and other places. I think there's like repeated Jesus-like characters that have popped up in historical records and all the rest of it. But apparently when you're spiritual and you're part of the priest class, you castrated yourself. This is seen as being a very spiritual thing to do. So again, that kind of ties into the idea of this androgynous character, because he's not a man, he's not a woman, because he obviously kind of cut his meat and two veg off, as we say in the UK. And there's that thing called, I don't know a huge amount about it, but he's called the Wounded King because obviously there's that connotation with crucifixion. But he actually points towards that's more to do with the fact that he castrated himself. Again, really, really controversial ideas. Not saying it's true, but yeah, it's just fascinating what this guy sort of dug up because he goes through some of like really, really old, do you call it like scripts, historical scripts, and looks at very, very ancient historians as well. So he tries to go right back and tries to find, I think he even does proper Indiana Jones stuff and travels to various countries and tries to do his research that way as well. So he does a lot of very in-depth research and he's not beholden to any particular tradition. He's just basically just trying to find the truth. But yeah, well, another fascinating thing about Christianity is the fact that there's no romantic relationship involved. Like if you go to like Egyptian mysticism, you have Isis and Osiris, and they're seen as gods and they have a love affair, and it's through that love of the union that kind of creates balance. Again, that doesn't really happen in mainstream Christianity I'm talking about. And the sort of masculine principle maybe was seen in Jesus, but the uber kind of divine feminine is Mother Mary. So they're not even in a romantic relationship. It's a mother and son sort of dynamic. So again, that's, these energies, that's how it's described within kind of traditional Western Christianity. But Mother Mary, as you will be aware, is like very much deeply nurturing, merciful, all of these traits, everything you'd expect. So again, Christianity is very, very unique when you compare to other spiritual traditions where Jesus is the Son of God. So there is that connection to the real world with God is through Jesus. And then Mary is then basically like the conduit to allow Jesus to exist on this earth, So it's an interesting dynamic when you actually look at it, at the bare bones of some of the aspects. And it's like very, very different to all the other spiritual traditions, what they're talking about. But so I guess some of the more esoteric or new age, like decoding of Jesus and his life, I leaned more towards the idea of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. I don't know if his character actually exists. I haven't really read deeply on this individual. This is what I'm doing now. I'm trying to understand. But this seems a bit more based in reality for me, where Jesus and Mary Magdalene, so Jesus was the male aspect, and then Mary Magdalene was the female aspect, and they were actually in a romantic relationship. They were in union. They were sort of, using New Age parlance, they were twin flames in a particular way, I guess. I definitely lean more towards that idea. Just because it makes more sense, and it makes sense why, the traditional church called Mary Magdalene a prostitute, because they really sort of degraded the idea of feminine energy in a way, and it just feels like a more of a balanced approach when you're giving Jesus and Mary Magdalene, more of a level pegging, more of a level like skin in the game in terms of like what they represent, how they represent God and how they represent God's love is through their love. I know you can go deeper on this, and I think I have spoken about it in a previous podcast, but the idea of actually Mary Magdalene being more important than Jesus. So yeah, I mean, because a lot of these traditions, not all of them, but some of them, I guess from the New Age perspective, you always like link divine energy and God energy maybe coming through the feminine more. And again, I talked about this a lot, but it just seems like, particularly within the West, all this yoga and meditation classes and like all of these things that I've been to over the years, it's just like 80% women, and the teachers, a majority of them are women. So it's very much spiritual revival that's happening on earth is very much being led by women, in my opinion, in my experience. So yeah, they just seem to have more intuitive psychic energy for some reason. Again, in my experience, I could be wrong. You can have a different experience. It's just what I'm perceiving, it's what I'm experiencing. So yeah, for me, it just feels like the feminine energy is more connected to sort of divine. I mean, I don't even know what God is. I mean, if I'm being honest, this is another aspect, really what is God? I don't know. I know I always feed into the word of God. It's nothing to me, but it kind of makes sense. Maybe we're all aspects of God, but what is that? I don't know. So these are big questions I'm tackling at the moment. I'm getting off topic, but yes, anyway, center, let's get back on topic. But I think like the dynamic of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it's probably open to interpretation, but Jesus maybe is seen as like the logos in terms of Gnosticism. He's the word, he's the divine, he's reason, he's active movement. Whereas Mary Magdalene may be linked to more Sophia's sort of divine wisdom and ability to create life and create spiritual realities. Yeah, it's funny because since I've been reading these books, I just started to get loads of synchronicities. Reality starts to kind of reflect back at you. And for some reason, I started watching. I was like looking, scrolling, thinking of a film to watch, and I came across that Dan Brown film. What's that called? The Da Vinci Code. Did see it years ago, but I forgot what it's about. And that was all about the controversial. Well, I don't think it's controversial, but the topic of Mary Magdalene and actually Jesus having a family, and then so having a lineage, and actually there might be humans around at the moment that are kind of part of that Jesus bloodline. So that's all what the Da Vinci Code is all about, and I'd forgotten that, and so it was just quite fascinating. Yeah, I was drawn to watch this film. Basically just kind of worked in harmony with what I've been reading recently. And overall, I mean, a lot of the research I've been doing, Mary Magdalene has been coming up a lot. And even like where my family have a holiday home on the Isle of Mull that which my dad built when he was a student, when he was a hippie. There's a church in the village there. I forgot what it's called, but it's got like an Irish style, like a pencil tower. And in that church, there's a stained glass window that looks like Jesus with Mary Magdalene. So there's a lot of stories, quite esoteric stories to do with Iona, because Iona supposedly is where Christianity sort of first came into United Kingdom. And then Iona is kind of linked to the Isle of Mull. And so I spent, many, many childhood and years after on the Isle of Mull. So it's just fascinating that Mary Magdalene stories are part of that island as well. So I'm just interlinking with Mary Magdalene quite a lot at the moment. So yeah, it's just some of the synchronicities that are going on in my life. So there you go. That's my long rambling talk about Christianity and feminine and masculine energies. And again, it's very, very subjective. But yes, anyway, so now I'm going to go into very dangerous waters. I'm going to talk about gender. Yeah, I could get myself cancelled. Don't think I have enough people watching or listening to this podcast that get cancelled, but I'm going to try. Obviously, it's a big, hot topic, and there's off the back of a recent in the UK. We have a thing called, which I think we copied the United States and created a Supreme Court, and they had a recent thing where they actually, by law, legally defined, women and men. And I think this whole thing is really a big distraction. All of this stuff is sort of divide and conquer. And there's some aspects that I have an opinion on, but just the heat and just the noise created around it, it's just, there's so much bigger things kind of going on, I think, and it's just all done to sort of create division, in my opinion, my humble opinion. And it's just all about, heightening physical attributes, whether you're arguing about race or whether you're arguing about gender or physical differences. I mean, I'm very much of the opinion we have a soul and probably had loads of different lifetimes. We've probably been a woman, or we've been a man, we've been a black person, but maybe been a Chinese person, maybe you've been a green man on a different planet or a different dimension. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. This kind of obsession with physical differences, it's just really tiring to listen to sometimes, how people identify so hard with it. For me, like, whether you're black or whether you're Indian or whether you're a woman, these are just like casual physical attributes. But, so many people have got their knickers in a twist at the moment and they're just identifying so hard with a physical shell. And the media's sort of played into it. It's conflating the whole thing. And again, I just think it's done on purpose. Overall in the mainstream, but even just within sort of, I guess, like general spiritual communities, there's always the talk about the rise of the feminine and living in a patriarchal society. And I guess to a certain degree that is correct. But I would argue, actually, I think we need healing and rising of both sides, of genuine feminine and genuine masculine. And I think when you've got this sort of feminine attacking the masculine for being toxic and dangerous, which is what is happening at the moment, I think that doesn't help, because it's sort of, you're creating another imbalance on the other side in a way. And I just think we should be both nice towards each other. The masculine should be nice to the feminine, and the feminine should be nice to the masculine. So I think it's a rising of both of these energies. But yeah, without a doubt, we've lived in a more patriarchal society, and it's hard to get away from, isn't it? Because even just going to work, like in offices, is a very patriarchal structure. You're earning money. It's all very, very patriarchal, sort of masculine actions in a way. So there is definitely a shift that needs to be, more nurturing towards people. So you're not working 8-9 hours a day, how many hours a week. This obsession with like earning money and materialism. I guess, yeah, you could argue they're all kind of masculine things. So yeah, it's complex. But yeah, I just think there is a real need to understand what really is the divine feminine, what really is the divine masculine. I think, like within myself, and I think generally society as a whole, I think we're figuring it out. Just gradually, we're sort of piecing it together. So if the world is still here in 10 years, I have no idea. I've got my thoughts. Maybe, I don't know, things are going to get a bit fruity these next few years, and I don't know. Will we still be here next year? I don't know. Not in a fearful way, but just think sometimes there are some big shifts and earth changes sort of coming. But yeah, what really does the fully embodied feminine or masculine look like? What does it feel like? But at the moment, everything is sort of very heavily influenced by culture, and culture is, a lot of the culture is not great. And again, a lot of these feminine masculine archetypes are heavily influenced by our parents and then their parents. And obviously the templates were not great. Particularly I remember growing up, there was a lot of problems in my family because, everyone's trying to afford to live, aren't they? Trying to afford to pay the mortgage and then pay bills. And then amongst that, you've got kids. I mean, it's a lot to sort of deal with. And again, I would argue that's sort of done on purpose to sort of make life as difficult as possible. So everyone's just running around like chickens, just not knowing, they don't have time to nurture themselves and just sort of think about life around them and spiritual matters. And so it's all kind of done on purpose in a way. But I think we have a unique opportunity where, the consciousness is rising. We're aware of all these things. We're aware that we lived in an unhealed society. We're aware that our parents didn't have the proper templates to bring us up, and vice versa. Now we're still struggling with unhealed traumas and unhealed aspects that are, happen through particular lineages, but also just collectively as well. But we're all aware of this, and there are techniques out there to sort of hopefully heal these things. So I think now more than ever, we're in a really good position to hopefully, make big changes in society. I think it's true. If people do sort of look to healing themselves, it's going to reverberate out, even if it's feels like a really small drop in a pond. That ripple's just going to ripple out, and it's going to affect everything. So that's my personal decoding and take on society and, the treating of men and women and feminine, masculine. I mean, it's just a very brief few paragraphs that I've spoken about, really. But now I'm going to go to the very controversial bit. I'm going to get to the trans stuff. It's funny when people discuss this topic, that even like race or gender, everyone always starts with like caveats. So media enables them to be able to be qualified to talk about that, which is what I'm going to do now. Some of my best friends are trans, which isn't true. But, I will say I have a love and respect for everyone. And, whatever they want to do with their body, I think is completely up to them, as an adult, which is another sort of could be controversial aspect to this, which, when it starts to kind of affect children, without a doubt, if you're an adult and you're definitely dead set on sort of changing your gender through, medicalization, taking particular drugs or having operations, that is up to you, without a doubt. But in terms of a personal anecdote, I mean, I was brought up in Chester, which is like the northwest of the United Kingdom. And back then, so I was, born in 1980. So I spent, pretty much all of the 1980s in Chester all the way to 1999, which is when I then left to go to Brighton to university. And I was never really in Chester back then. It was very white sort of culture. I never saw any openly gay people walking around Chester. It just does and it's a bit different now. The Chester College is expanded. It's now Chester University. There's a lot more students, so it's a bit more kind of, relaxed about those sort of things. But I think that's the case for the whole world now. Like particularly United Kingdom, things are relaxed a lot. And I remember at school, without a doubt, one of the biggest insults you could give someone was like saying they were gay. Without a doubt, there's been a lot of growth and healing that's kind of occurred, I think, societally, and that's definitely been needed. Brighton University, I didn't know at the time, but Brighton is, I think it's like perceived as being the gay capital of Europe. I don't know if that's true or not, but definitely is a huge gay community there. It's very artistic, it's a very creative place to be. People have found sanctuary, I think, from all over the country, moved to Brighton to feel that they can be openly gay there. And I always remember when I went down to like an open day in 99 to see if I wanted to go to Brighton University. I think it was like the first time got the train down there. I remember sort of stood in the station. I always remember this. It was like the first time I'd actually seen two men holding hands before. I'd never seen that, due to the fact you just don't get those kind of communities in Chester. Or if you do, obviously they're kind of hidden away in particular pubs and all the rest of it. But it's one of those sort of things, it's a curiosity. I'd never really come across that. It wasn't like I'd hate person for doing that. It was just, I noticed it because I'd never seen it before. When I was at university there, like a large part of my social group were gay or lesbian. I mean, I went clubbing to loads of gay clubs. I lived with like quite a few gay people at one particular point. So it was very much part of my whole student sort of life, was sort of gay culture in a way. And it was always really annoying because, not in a bad way, but like gay men always really liked me. And I always remember thinking, God, it's so easy with a guy. But like, I remember really struggling with girls back then. And I was just like, why can't it be as easy with these guys who like me, with these girls who I actually like? I definitely got better with women as the years progressed, as you get more experience as you do. But, when I was at university, I was terrible. I was really bad. Anyway, yes. So where was I? I got lost in the weeds a bit. So So I was aware of, there were sort of various trans people in various friendship groups I was with at that time. And I could see it was even being in Brighton, which is very, very open to that sort of thing, it still wasn't an easy path to take. So it was kudos to them if they wanted to go that route. I still aware that them receiving, verbal and physical abuse and stuff, which isn't great. So there's a lot of bravery at that point in time taking that path. So I think, looking back, there was definitely some readjustment that needed to happen in society to, if people wanted to do that, then okay, that's to make them happy, fine, cool. You can go that route. That's not a problem. But what's funny, even in the United Kingdom, we have these thing called pantomimes, which happen at a theatre. They tend to occur over a Christmas period. This is interlinked, don't worry, just stick with me. This is kind of in contrast to the UK sort of culture, and maybe someone from the United States or Canada might be slightly different. But anyway, these pantomimes, they happen in theatre, and they tend to be, family orientated theatre. And it involves stories like Jack and the Beanstalk or Cinderella. But in these pantomimes, you have a dame, which is usually played by sort of very camp gay man. And we have sort of various like actors who are well known, who are generally gay. They're very well known for playing pantomime dames. So it's very like intrinsic to this like comedy theatre that even children watch, like it's seen as like family entertainment. So it could be quite jarring to American ears, maybe, I don't know. But it's not in a sexual way. It's just seen as a funny thing. It's like, oh yeah, because usually these sort of the pantomime dame is like someone's mother. So you could have like Jack, he would have his mother, who'd be like a pantomime dame. And I think even like what's that guy's name from Lord of the Rings? Ian McKellen. He still does pantomime now, and he's like a dame. And obviously he's like a multi-millionaire film star. He's done like Lord of the Rings and loads of Marvel stuff. So he's not short of cash, but he just likes the culture of pantomimes. I know my parents went to see him. I think it was maybe a year ago, 2 years ago. It was a theatre in Salford, which is near Manchester, and he was playing in the pantomime there. So yeah, it's quite a big part of culture in the United Kingdom to have these kind of cross-dressing men, essentially. But even I was thinking, he's a comedian, he's dead now, Paul O'Grady, sort of became quite a famous sort of daytime television individual. But before that, he had like a drag character called Lily Savage. And again, it wasn't sexual. Everyone knew it was a man dressed as a woman, but this is like prime time Friday night television or Saturday night television. So it was very much family based. So it wasn't sexual. So just all I'm trying to say is that there's a big difference, I think, with it, even in Western cultures, how sort of men dressing as women. I mean, again, this is more for entertainment. So, yeah, obviously, when they sort of take off the costume, they're wearing the clothes of a man a lot of the time. But I'm just sort of looking at some of these archetypes, I guess. And then also like entertainment. I've been to drag shows. I mean, I remember I did part of my university degree in Australia, and I was sort of, after I finished, I went traveling on the east coast of Australia. I was in Sydney. We went to a drag show there, and it was really good. They were doing songs, and it wasn't sexualized at all. It was just really, really talented individuals like putting on performance. And again, relating back to Brighton and Brighton Festival, which happens in May time, which is on right about now, actually, as I record this. They're probably there now. It's called the Lady Boys of Bangkok. So it's a load of lady boys from Bangkok. And this is, again, I think, yeah, you can take your family there. There's no like nudity in there. I mean, the women the men who are like women are very, very convincing. They look like attractive women. I think obviously because sort of Thai individuals, they got quite soft skin anyway. So yeah, they kind of, if they do want to look like a woman, it's a lot more natural for them. But yeah, I remember when my parents were visiting, we took them to go and see the Lady Boys of Bangkok. So yeah, and they loved it. It was a great entertaining experience. But I think there is another side. I think it's definitely happened in the United States where they're sort of specifically, was it called Drag Time Story Hour? And I know not all of them are like this, but I've definitely seen videos online where it's quite highly sexualized to the point of being like a striptease thing. And you got kind of kids there, and I'm like, that's a bit odd. But again, it's one of those sort of divide and conquer things, because that event sort of happens, you don't know who's funding it, and then it's just blown up on the internet, and then it's like one event involving a few people, and then obviously video goes all over the world, and it just creates outrage, and it's all political, left against right, and it's again quite a small subsection of society. But it just creates all of this division. It creates all of this like anger, blah, blah, blah. And again, I just think it's done on purpose a lot of the time. But it's even like the debate of it as well. Like you can't say anything about people blowing up and sort of calling you far right or a Nazi. And, some of these titles now are just so ridiculous. the way people, if there's a slight variation in the political narrative, then you're immediately like a complete Nazi or right wing. And I think it's like a lot of the time it's the media sort of creating these stereotypes on both sides, for everyone to rage against on each other. But I think there's a whole aspect to, obviously what I've been talking about a lot is the stagecraft and entertainment of like sort of men dressing as women for like entertainment. It'd be like a Saturday night thing or a Friday. They're not constantly sort of living it. But there's a whole thing now where it's the whole process is being very much medicalized. And this is what kind of, makes me wince, particularly when you're talking about teenagers taking puberty blockers. And a lot of the time, some of the effects just aren't reversible. And they're being sold like a lie, it's like, oh, you feel depressed because you feel like you're in the wrong body. You should take these puberty blockers and then basically transition and start having these operations. And that I think is really quite dangerous, actually, just because, you're young, you don't know who you are. Everyone struggles with, some of the thoughts in their heads. But if you're making decisions which are irreversible when you're so young, I mean, I think it's being pushed. I mean, this is a lot more of an American thing as well, just because the medical system is so crazy out there. And this is another aspect because obviously it's a customer for life because you're taking puberty blockers and then you're maybe taking testosterone or hormone treatments, then you're taking that for life. And then some of these operations are particularly expensive. So yeah, it's all about getting them through that medical pipeline, and then it creates the medical industry, it creates a lot of money, it creates a lot of revenue. So I think this is another aspect to why it's being pushed so hard. But again, that's probably more American centric rather than United Kingdom, because I know a lot of things have been stopped here. Like you can't get puberty blockers for like, teenagers now. That's just not going to happen. And I think because of my own experience being at Brighton University and people really were experimenting with their sexuality, because it was seen quite, it was quite cool. Like, oh, I remember a friend of mine who was like, I'm bisexual, it just makes you seem like mysterious when he didn't really ever kiss a guy. I think there was one time he did, but he was very, very like drunk. So there was this sort of kind of strange allure and coolness to it. And I knew there was a guy I lived with and he was like, by all intents and purposes, like was living as a gay man, but now he's married to a woman with kids. And this is what I mean. People change, they sort of may not grow out of it, but maybe they just experiment and realize, no, actually, I'm more happy this way. And I think if you're medicalizing people and then also having operations when you're sort of, let's be honest, you're taking bits of their bodies off, that's very final and there's no going back from that. So that just makes me worry just because of my own experience of people sort of changing their sexuality at university. Now that a lot of them are sort of set in one particular thing, like, I know few girls who are now gay and in very, very happy relationships with their partners and now have kids and all the rest of it. And yeah, so I think it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. I think these decisions, if you did want to like medically transition, need to be made as an adult when you're fully informed of all the dangers. And there are a lot of dangers. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. I think all you hear is the positive aspects of it. And yeah, I think that's bad because it's not all positive all the time. It's not necessarily going to make you feel complete by transitioning to a different sex. It might not solve your mental health problems. But I mean, it is a controversial thought, but I think you need to bring in traumas to do with this as well. How much the traumas, like family traumas or epigenetics affect this. And it is controversial, but I think there is an aspect to this potentially, how it can kind of, I mean, there's that sort of Netflix series, is it Baby Reindeer's a comedian there, and he goes through a period of being sexually abused by a comedy writer. He sort of feeds him drugs. And basically after that experience, he sort of, I'm not saying messes with his sexuality, but he starts to kind of, through trauma, like just have sex with anyone, not just because before he was exclusively just having sex with women, but you'd have sex with trans people or men. So I think there is a debate and it's a very controversial one. about trauma, how that plays into someone's sexuality. I'm not saying that if you're gay that you're unhealed. I'm not, but I think there is potentially an aspect of that with some people. And another quite like more spiritual aspect to that whole debate about sort of gender and like what you identify with is that I was at a conference last year with Andrea Folks, and she's like known for past life regression and sort of inner child healing. And what she started talking about the gender thing during her talk at this conference, and I thought it was really, really fascinating. And because she was saying there's a lot of beings coming through at the moment that she's found, because there are people coming to her that have maybe got gender dysphoria with a way to sort of maybe help them integrate better into their body. And she was saying that some of the clients she's seeing, they're beings that are coming from, I don't know, other dimensions or planets or whatever, where they don't really have a gender. So they're not identifying as male or female, which is why then they struggle when they come into the human form. It's like, oh no, I'm a man, oh, I'm a woman, I'm not used to this. And it sort of creates that dysphoria. So that's another, that's never going to be accepted by mainstream medical people, is it really? But I think it's a credible aspect to this whole conversation, is that like the reincarnation cycle, that maybe you were a being last time and you didn't have a gender, which is why you're struggling. Or, you could have had a reincarnation as a woman last time, you come into a man's body, and that's again why you're struggling, because you're not used to being a man, because your previous, reincarnation, you're a woman. And again, this is another part of the debate as well. So, again, like if you have gender dysphoria, I think these things should be brought into the mix. I think you should be regressed and then figure out what your last reincarnation was, and then you can maybe find out why you've got gender dysphoria, because you're not feeling confident in your body because, of X, Y, Z. So, bit of a controversial rant. I think I've gone a long, I've gone a long time. But I just thought I wanted to add it to the whole like feminine, masculine energies, because it does really play into sort of gender, and gender is a big topic at the moment. And I want to approach it with like love and respect and stuff. And, I want everyone to be happy. But I do want to be able to freely discuss some of these ideas, and it is on my mind. It's quite cathartic for me to speak about it on mic as well. But it is a big conversation. I think part of it is because it's been inflamed on purpose to create division, because that, the people who think that at the top, they think they're controllers, they don't really, but they just create chaos through any means necessary. And gender has been part of that. And obviously I think they've got very pseudo strange religious, spiritual views as well, and that sort of plays into it. But I think genuinely, like all of these things, where humanity's healing, and part of that is trying to understand the feminine, understand the masculine. So that is coming up naturally as well. And it's obviously, like I've spoken about, the reason why I'm doing this podcast, because it's really come up in these last few months, because it's part of the spiritual attacks that I've had, it's part of these twin flame stuff. It's just, it's just been a big part of my journey. And so I wanted to talk about it. It's a bit of departure from what I usually talk about. Usually I talk about more concepts to like earth energies or, high strangeness and paranormal. So I guess it's a bit more spiritual than usual. But again, it's more of a cathartic exercise for me. And I think it's been part of my shadow, and I think it's part of the collective shadow as well. So it's been helpful for me. So there you go. It's been part of my healing process. But I think I'm going to end it there. I don't think I'm going to conclude much more than that. Food for thought. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully now I'm going to be creating a bit more content. Let's hope, fingers crossed, touch wood. But you can obviously catch the podcast on all major podcast platforms. If you want to listen to it on any video streaming services, on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute. I have a website, reconsidersimon.com. So I will catch you at the next one. I am going to try and start interviewing at some point. So, I'm going to try and do more videos out in the field if I can, and then interview. I know I keep saying that, but that is definitely the position. That's the sort of direction I'm pushing myself in. Anyway, it has been amazing. This is podcast number 21. feminine and masculine. So hope you enjoyed it, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go now, and I'm going to say thank you. And good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Take care. Bye bye.